put the whoosy on the whatsy. Attach the whatsy to the whoosy. Connect the thingamajig to the thingamabob, and that'll make the whatchamacallit.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Making Records with Eric Valentine. As you can see from the title, we're going to be diving into the song What's Going On. And I just want to say, for those of you that only come here for nerdy stuff about engineering and making records and whatnot, I apologize. This one's gonna veer off that a little bit. And for those of you that might feel like, you know, I should be doing more or should have done more to acknowledge what's going on in the world right now, I apologize. And what I'm going to try to do, at the risk of totally bumming everybody out, is do both right now in one episode. But I think it's I'm it's doable because this song is that incredible. It's incredible in every way. So let's see what happens. Hopefully this will work out. So this song is really, really interesting to me, and I've crossed paths with it in a bunch of different ways over the years, where it just keeps popping up, this song and this album. So I think, first of all, the main reason that I'm choosing this song for a deep dive is that in my travels, I happened to stumble onto a Pro Tools transfer of the multitrack master of this song. I was just beyond delighted when I was able to get my hands on this because it's just such an incredible song, such an incredible recording, such an incredible moment in the development of music. So I have that. So we're going to be able to go through and solo all the tracks, check everything out, see how this song was put together. It's really, really, really cool. And so the other thing that happened when I moved to Crystal Studios in 2000, there was a whole lot of cleanup to do. There was just a ton of stuff that was just left in that place, and so it was just days and days of sort of clearing out just old papers and stuff. There was tons of old tapes that were left there, everything. And so one of the things that I found in a really odd place, there was this, what is now sort of the main lounge for Studio A. There was this mysterious door that was on the wall as if there was a second floor. And so there was, presumably there was a second floor, and it got pulled out, but they just left this door that was just floating way up on the wall, like 10 feet up, And so at one point we got a ladder, went in there, and there was a bunch of old papers in there. It was a closet, and so one of the things that I found in there was handwritten sheet music for the song Save the Children. It's a song off of the album What's Going On. And so at that time, I thought, wow, boy, they must have worked on this record here. And it was specifically sheet music for the strings. And so now later, I've researched a bunch about the history of the record, and so there's no specific references to recording being done at what used to be Crystal Studios, but because they moved from Detroit, Motown Records moved from Detroit to L.A. in the midst of making this record, and it was finished in Los Angeles at studios that were all in and around. I think it's very, very possible that they did do a string session at Crystal. It was a great place for that. It was one of the studios that had a really nice big room for doing strings. So I believe, parts of that record were actually recorded at the studio that I now own and, have worked out of for a long time. One of the other things that I discovered that I sort of synced up with the path of this whole thing was that, Grace and I moved to Topanga, I guess almost 3 years ago now. And we just did an episode that aired last night about the history of music in Topanga. When I was researching that, I found out that Marvin Gaye moved to Topanga and lived here for a long time. He moved here sometime, I think, around the mid-'70s, and lived in Topanga for a really long time. It's actually, if you search around, there's a bunch of cool pictures of him hanging out in Topanga. You can see here. These are all just like hiking trails. This skyline in the back here is unquestionably Topanga Canyon. Here's another picture of him tearing around a motorcycle. And this is a hiking trail. We hike on this trail all the time. I believe this is one that goes up towards Eagle Rock. And there he is hanging out at his house in Topanga Canyon. So, so he hung out here a lot and lived here for a long time. So there's that I stumbled onto, and then there's a bunch of like really interesting technical stuff that I stumbled onto as well. That was like these just kind of serendipitous coincidences and similarities, that where my ears have gravitated over the years has just led me right in the direction of Motown for some reason. And so you may have seen the episode that I did when I was comparing a hardware EQ versus a plug-in, and it's that Soundtoys CQ EQ. It's an emulation of an old Neumann, W295 equalizer. And I loved the plug-in so much I ended up buying, some of the original hardware versions. And I love those EQs. I use them all the time. They're just super magical sounding for boosting mid-range and high-end and stuff. And so as I was researching for this episode, I found out that Motown had a solid-state Neumann console installed in one of their studios in probably the late 60s, somewhere around there. And it most likely had these equalizers in it. I thought that was kind of interesting. I found out they used Scully tape machine, an 8-track Scully tape machine. I owned an 8-track Scully tape machine. I loved it so much that I ended up buying a 16-track version of it. That's the tape machine that I used to record Grace's whole last record, the Daylight album. I've been using it on everything. It's probably my favorite sounding tape machine, that and the J37. And then also, I've discovered that one of the other consoles that they had that they described was this Langevin console. It was an 8-channel console that was a left, center, right console. So you could, there wasn't like a pan rotating knob for panning. There was just a switch where you could switch to left, center, or right. And at one point when I was just, looking for cool, vibey equipment, I stumbled onto this 8-channel Langevin console that had left, center, right, assignment controls on it. I don't think this was the one that that was from Motown. It sounds like it's pretty much essentially the exact same console. The one that I got, the history of it was that it was originally owned by the Kingston Trio and then got bought by Zoetrope Studios. And I think when I bought it, it was being auctioned off out of Zoetrope. And then I used it for a while just as a cool, set of mic pre's and a front end. And then I ultimately took it apart and converted it into just individual, little rack-mounted AM16 mic preamps. And then more recently, I did a complete overhaul of my passive summing mixer system, where I basically took the guts of that Langevin console and incorporated it into my passive summing mixer. And so that is now that Langevin console, and it had these cool inductor EQs in it and stuff. That has now become my passive summing mixer. And so those AM16s make up the gain on the various summing stages in my passive summing mixer. I'm going to do a whole episode about that. It was a total revelation for me. And so I thought that was interesting that, I gravitated towards that and came back to it again, with my passive summing mixer. Super excited about how that thing's sounding now. And then when I was researching this, I found details about their chamber reverbs and what they described, the chamber reverbs, how they were designed. There was this really brilliant guy. Here, I got to look up his name and just make sure I mention this guy because he was the head engineer. Mike McLean was, I guess, the head engineer at Motown. And and he designed the chambers. And the way he did it was, you know, it was a room with plaster walls, and then on top of the plaster, they used this hard lacquer to make the walls really reflective and sort of shiny, you know, reflective walls. When I moved into what is now Barefoot, used to be Crystal Studios, there was a chamber that was set up there, and it was set up almost identical to this. When they described it, I couldn't believe it. So they had, it was plaster walls where they had lacquered over the surface of them, and there was the remnants of a speaker setup. The other thing about the Motown chambers was he did a custom speaker setup where there was only a mid-range driver and a tweeter. There was no low-frequency driver at all. And he used SM57s in the chamber. That I have not tried, and I am going to immediately the next time I'm at Barefoot. I actually have a full range speaker in there, but I almost always end up sort of high passing out the low end and just have the reverb be more airy in there. But a lot of similarities there as well. So for whatever reason, my ears have just gravitated in the same direction that the Motown engineers, I guess really felt worked for them and for the music they were creating. And, I, more recently have done these much more stripped down miking setups and drums. When I read through this article and on the making of this song, they talk about that. It's very similar to what I've been doing. And by the way, I was planning on really digging all over the place to try and, gather up all this information about this song. And somebody just did all the work for me. This really wonderful guy at Sound on Sound. His name is Richard Buskin. Did an amazing in-depth article about the song, What's Going On. And so he did all the work for me. All I had to do is basically go through this article. Pretty much most of the details that I'm going to be reciting, as we go through this are from this article. So if you want to dive even deeper into this, it's an amazing article. There's more stuff that I won't have time. I don't want to just read his whole article. You guys can do that yourself. So that, there's just been a lot of really interesting, crossover in my travels making records with Motown and this album in particular and this song, and so I felt like it would be a cool song to feature right now. So let's get into this song a little bit. We'll talk about the inception of the song because I think it's particularly poignant right now. So the song actually, the idea for the song did not come from Marvin Gaye. The original idea came from this guy named Ronaldo Obi Benson. He was one of the members of the Four Tops. And apparently he was on tour or whatever, traveling and in San Francisco. And this is in the late 60s. I'm thinking it was probably 69. And witnessed a protest going on in San Francisco. And saw these protesters being brutalized by the police. And it affected him so deeply that it inspired him to come up with the idea for this song. He just had to say something about it. And what I think is especially poignant about this is that this was an African-American man witnessing what are presumably a bunch of long-haired hippies, and when you go through the lyrics in the song, it sort of alludes to that, protesting the Vietnam War, being brutalized by the police, and feeling so much compassion that he felt that he really needed to acknowledge it with this amazing song, and gave the world the beginnings of this incredible song, which is one of the, most celebrated social commentary, social awareness songs about this issue that has ever happened. And I think in light of that, it's like I couldn't imagine a more perfect time to reciprocate with that same compassion and support and acknowledgement right now. So me featuring this song, I think, is me trying to acknowledge that with what's happening right now. So that was the beginning of it. He brought it to Marvin. Marvin initially thought that it might be good for another artist. And then I think it was Obi that convinced him, like, no, I really think you should do this song. So Marvin finished off the lyrics and they worked on the song. It had sort of an uncertain, launch, because apparently Berry Gordy at Motown did not like the song. Thought it was just too much of a throwback and sounded too jazzy and really wasn't what he was trying to do with Motown at the time, and refused to put it out. And Marvin held his ground and said, "I will not make any more music until you put this song out." So, I really applaud him for sticking to his guns. Sometimes you have to do that. And so after months of, back and forth and people going back to Barry and trying to persuade him, other people weighing in, finally the song did get released. It ended up being the most successful, fastest selling single release that Motown ever had. So sometimes you got to really fight for what you got to want to do and what you want to say artistically, And then ultimately, because the success of the song, Berry Gordy was like, "Oh, we got to make a whole record now." And so, Marvin ended up making a whole record titled after the hugely successful release of the song. And that's when things transitioned from Detroit to LA, and most of the record was recorded in LA. But the song, What's Going On, was still recorded at the original, Hitsville Motown Studios in Detroit. So that's kind of, the story about the inception of the song. As we get into it a little bit, we'll listen to some of the lyrics. There's some things, basically the gist of this song is, speaks in such a beautiful way, better than I ever could, about all the stuff that's going on right now. And it really sums up in a beautiful way what I think is important about what's going on right now. So we'll be able to check that out. So you can see here I have the multi-track master. You can see right here. It's 16 tracks. This was most likely recorded on an Ampex MM1000. They'd actually switched to a 16-track MM1000 at some point. It must have been used for this recording, because they definitely didn't have a 16-track Scully machine. And so here it is, pretty straightforward. And this was super fun for me. It was really fun to try and just recreate the original mix. And it was pretty simple, a very straightforward mix. I mean, they're basically just setting levels, panning stuff, some EQ here and there, and putting chamber reverbs on stuff, and then it sounded like some overall compression, and that's it, That's what my ears told me, so, that's where I ended up with this thing. So I did some EQing here and there, some stuff I didn't have to, added some chamber reverbs, and I got pretty close. It was really, really fun to do this. So check this out. This is the original song. I have it in here, right here. There's the original song. I'm using this wonderful little Hofa A-Being thing. We're not doing any blind listening tests right now. We're just soloing back and forth. It just does it in a really smooth way, So check this out. Here is the original. You can hear the party vibes there. There's something interesting about that as well we'll get into. Okay, then here's my mix.
Mother,
Original.
Too many of you crying. Brother,
There's mine.
there's far too many of you dying.
There's the original.
To bring some loving here today. Yeah. Father, we don't need
There's mine.
escalates. You see, war is not the end.
So, I mean, it's pretty close. I wasn't really trying to be that exact about it, but and I think, if I spent more time on it, I probably could have gotten even a little closer. But it was really fun to do that, and it's definitely different than how I would have approached mixing this if I was just doing my thing on it. There would have been a lot more shenanigans going on over here, me trying to make the drums punchier and all kinds of stuff, like that. But I love this original mix because it is so relaxed and nothing's being forced. It's just letting everything just be what it is, and letting just the organic musicality of what was captured just sort of fall into place very effortlessly. I think it's a really, really beautiful mix, and not how I probably would have approached it if I was left to my own instincts. So that was really cool and informative for me to do that. So let's start checking out some of these individual tracks, man. This is so fun. One of my favorite things is putting this thing together in different combinations. When you start hearing this thing stripped down, it's so incredible. Like, just the way it adds up is so cool. So here's the main drum track. And this actually, when I was researching, it wasn't the guy who was playing on a lot of the sessions. This was, I guess, one of the first records, apparently, where the Funk Brothers, I don't know if any of you have seen that Standing in the Shadows of Motown documentary. It's an amazing documentary about Motown's history and the incredible musicians that played on so much of that awesome music. There's this guy named Richard Pistol Allen. Oh boy, I gotta make sure I'm getting these names right. I'm just the worst show host ever. Let me make sure I'm not screwing this up. Yeah, that was right. Richard Pistol Allen, who played on a lot of the stuff around this time. He ended up not playing on this song. Apparently Marvin wanted to try something different. And so there was this guy named Chet Forrest that came into play on the song What's Going On. And apparently he was more of like a big band swing type drummer, but also an amazing drummer. And I think he probably used the same setup that was in there that's described in this article. And so this is this guy, Chet Forrest, playing drums with the, studio drum setup that they sort of kept set up at Motown in Detroit. It's a really, really cool, just mono, simple drum sound. Check this out. So apparently, at this time, the standard setup for the drums was, and man, I love that. Like, that's, I've been going for drum sounds like that. If you listen to Grace's last record, the song Love is Love is a drum sound where I was going for something like this. And what they say in this article was that the kick drum mic was actually an RCA 77, and then they used 67. So there's a 67 close up on the snare drum, and then a 67 as an overhead to catch the cymbals and toms and stuff like that. And it's just a really simple setup, just kick, snare, ragtime, floor tom, a ride cymbal, and a crash cymbal on the left, and that's it. That's the whole drum set. But such a cool vibe and groove on this, man. This guy is just super solid, consistent, groovy vibe. And so I ended up just clearing out a little bit of low end. It just sounded a little brighter on the mix. I ended up adding brightness here. So this is like 4 dB. And I'm using these Motown EQs because possibly this is what was used to mix it. So, like 4 dB at 5.6K, another 6 dB at 15K. And then I found that I needed to tame the brightness of the snare drum relative to the brightness of the cymbals. when I listened to the original mix, it seemed like the cymbals were brighter on theirs relative to the snare drum, and this is the only way I could get it to work. That could have been due to a variety of things, you know, this, if they were using noise reduction at all, the transfer in this, if they got any of that wrong, it would cause that to happen, that difference to happen. So I was just sort of compensating with that, for that, just what my ears were telling me to do. So the original thing, and then I should say, this is sending to a reverb, which is this guy right here. And this is what sounded the closest to me. It had the closest sort of high-end splash to me. So this ended up not being an impulse response of a chamber, but of a vintage spring reverb, and that's what matched for me. So if I take all of this off, that's what the original track sounded like. A little less lows, a little more brightness, taming the brightness on the snare, and then the splashy reverb, and it sounds really close to the original thing. So here we'll go back to the beginning and A-B a little bit, and just listen for the drums, listen for the timbre and the reverb on the drums. Pretty close, pretty close there. So the other thing is that the drum groove is really a combination of two things. And when I was reading through this article, this guy Kenneth Sands, who was one of the just like staff engineers for Motown, he worked on the sessions for this song, and so he mostly did the overdub sessions, but he was around and he had firsthand knowledge of what happened on this session. And so there's this overdub that's this really interesting thing. It's one of the things that always blows me away when I go back and listen to some of these classic old master songs. It's like, it's sort of like the willingness to just do what works and not really stick to formulaic stuff, you know. So like this main drum pattern, this is a very common drum pattern that's been played on a lot of songs. But what they added to it was this really interesting percussion overdub that's just kick drum, and it sounds like the person playing on a snare drum with the snares turned off, with this really cool syncopated pattern. And apparently the person who played this was Marvin Gaye. He was apparently a really great drummer, and would actually early on play drums on sessions for other artists in Motown sessions. So check this part out. Like, who would think to do this? It's such a cool thing. It's such a cool part, and like, I would never think to do that. It's so cool. Check out what it does to the drum part. It just adds so much bounce and momentum, you know, to this groove. So this thing I just sent to the same reverb and did a similar move where just added a bunch of brightness to it. It just sounded brighter on the original mix. So this is 8 dB at 5.6K and 9 dB at 15K. And so the original thing sounded like that. So there they are together. So then you get into this amazing, iconic sound that's such a huge part of the whole What's Going On album, is the congas. So this I ended up sending to, I had a couple mono chambers set up in the session, and so this is sending to one of those and then a stereo chamber here. And the chamber that I'm using on this stuff, here's all the reverb stuff, ended up being this one. This is what sounded the close. It's so this is Altiverb. It's one of these Bill Putnam designed echo chambers, And so this is chamber number 2 here. This is chamber number 5 here. And then the stereo one is mostly what you're hearing on this is also chamber number 5. And so these are all from Cello Studios that you can see. And these are good, man. They, you know, I think they did a good IR capture on these, and they're beautiful sounding chambers. You know, I've been able to pull those up before when I've done sessions at cello, and they sound amazing. So on this, sort of a similar thing, just kind of getting rid of some cloudy low end stuff, brightening a little bit here, a little bit of 2 dB of 5.6K, 6 dB of 15K. And then I had to do this same thing where the harder hits just got too bright, and I don't know why that was on this transfer of it, but I ended up having to tame the really hard slaps so they weren't too splashy sounding the reverb. It just didn't sound the same as their final mix. So I put this on there to try and fix that. But the original thing sounds like this, you know, and it just sounds like a great classic recording. You know, when you record stuff through, you know, an old vintage Neumann console onto an Ampex MM1200 tape machine, it's going to sound like this, you know. It just comes with that gear, you know. Okay, so this is where it works. So now let's hear these together. Such cool syncopation, and I love the syncopation between the conga and Marvin Gaye's drum overdub. And so like in the second half of the phrase, they're literally just accenting opposite each other. It's so cool the way they play off of each other. And then the drum, the main drum track is sort of like the anchor in the middle. So cool, man. Okay, then there's the bass. So for any of you that at this point have not, for any reason, you know, become aware of the incredible, iconic genius of James Jamerson, you're in for a treat. I can't imagine anybody doesn't know about how amazing this guy was. So this is James Jamerson playing bass on this song. And in the Standing in the Shadows of Motown documentary, they tell an incredible story about him playing on this song. So Marvin Gaye, you know, they started the tracking session for this song. He wanted to see if it was going to work for him. And at some point in the session, Marvin felt very strongly like, man, we really need Jamerson on this song. We've got to get him in here. And Jamerson was playing a live gig at some jazz club in town or something. And so I guess they stopped the session, was like, go find Jamerson, get him in here. We just need him on this song. And so they went out and found him. And apparently, you know, he was an infamously, you know, heavy drinker. And so they waited for him to finish his gig and scooped him up and brought him back to the studio. And by the time he got to the studio, he was so drunk that he couldn't actually sit up in a chair. He couldn't even sit up, hold himself up in a chair. He was so drunk. And so he was still, you know, Marvin was still like determined to have him on this song. And so they laid him down on his back on the floor so he could play the song and just, you know, somehow perch the sheet music in front of his face as he laid on the floor to play this song. And so that's how he did this performance, you know, was laying on his back, drunk out of his mind. And so, you know, people have commented that he had an extraordinary gift to still be able to play bass even when he was, you know, beyond incapacitated. So, and I've met people like that. It's called state-dependent learning. I've learned that as well. And so there are certain people, when you do something you spend more time doing something in the state of inebriation, you almost become better at doing it when you're in that state. It actually becomes more difficult to do it when you're not drunk than when you are. So I think that may be the case here. So check out this bass playing, this bass part, the bass sound, everything. It's just as good as bass gets. And the part has Jamerson's sort of characteristic wandering around. There are these themes that he comes home to at times, but he always finds new ways to move around the theme. And so the bass is just constantly changing and finding new paths to weave around the theme of this song. He was so incredible at that. And it just makes the song feel like it's always like moving, to new places, and it takes you on this journey. He's just incredible musician. And so when you listen to this thing all the way through, I encourage you to do that. Just really take a second to listen to this song all the way through. Just let yourself go on the journey with this bass, man. It is totally incredible. And so the other thing that's kind of cool about this is that apparently the way they recorded a lot of the guitar and the bass was that same guy, the McLean guy, Mike McLean, I think I remember his name right, he made this really cool line amplifier box. It was a 5-channel line amplifier box. And so any instruments in the room that could be plugged in were all recorded direct to try and, keep lots of isolation, because everybody was more or less in the same room. I think there was some isolation for quieter instruments, but like the drums and the piano and the bass player and the guitars, like everybody's in the same room. And back then, they were trying to maintain as much clarity and isolation and trying to get the recordings as clean as possible. I mean, now we kind of have the opposite problem, because the computers are so clean and it's easy to overdub everything and you have unlimited tracks, but they were still trying to get things as clean as possible. And so this Mike McLean guy made this amazing line amplifier where you could just plug instruments directly into it, and then they would just be captured straight on the tape machine. And so this bass is recorded DI, just straight into the tape machine. And then they had this one speaker in the room where they would feed signals back out there, because they would plug, on this session, it was the bass and the guitar into this line amplifier. And then they would put it back out in the room with this little monitor speaker, so the musicians could hear themselves playing in the room, and they had control over how much volume they would put back in the room, so it didn't get too much into other things, but just enough so the musicians could hear themselves playing. And so it's the same thing with one of these guitar parts. This is just, and by the way, the bass, nothing. No EQ, no compression, just set the level. It's that perfect, and it sounds exactly like the original final mix. I have a feeling they did absolutely nothing with that. Just set the volume and you're done. That dude just played so consistently and had such an amazing touch for the instrument that it just sounds perfect. It's totally incredible. Okay, so this is one of the 2 guitar tracks, and you'll hear that this is, I'm gonna pull off the stuff, just sounds like a totally DI guitar. There's no bleed from any other instruments in this. The guy's playing in the room with everybody else, so it probably definitely went through this same line amp, and then he was monitoring himself through the little monitor speaker. So this thing, I ended up brightening a little bit. It sounded like they did that on the original mix. So here's probably 7 dB at 5.6K, and me pulling out a bunch of kind of, cloudy low end stuff, and then just sent it to chamber reverbs. So then there's another guitar. This one, very interesting. This one does not sound like it went through the line amp to my ear. So I couldn't find any reference to how this guitar may have been recorded, but this is odd. So it sounds like it's definitely an amp in a room, or maybe they just mic'd the guitar itself. So it doesn't sound like an acoustic guitar, but it may have been a hollow body guitar that they mic'd in the room. And it's definitely gated, which I was interesting. Like not something that I would think people would choose to do, but when you listen to this, there's no question that there's a noise gate on this. And so I think noise gates did exist back then. There was, real old ones that were floating around in the late 60s, I think. I haven't researched that. I should have researched that. But check this out. It's definitely gated. And gated in an attempt to remove the ambience, I'm assuming, of the other instruments that are being played in the room. But this does sound, there have been times where I've mic'd an electric hollow body guitar, and this sounds kind of like that they just put a mic on the hollow body guitar and then tried to gate out some of the ambience of the other instruments. You can hear the drums in there in the background. But these two guitar parts end up getting panned together on the same side. And again, really cool syncopation between the two of them. Right at the end of the phrase, they play off each other in such a cool way. Okay, so now we got drums, the conga, bass, and guitars. Get back to another view. Oh boy. I just got to keep this thing more in my view so I make sure I'm showing the right stuff here. Such a cool groove. Okay, so now, let's see, what do we want to get into next? Let's get into the saxophone next, because that comes in next, and then I think after that we'll do the vibes. Yeah, we'll wait for the strings here. Okay, so there's that beautiful sax part that comes in the beginning. So let's hear that. This was a sound. Didn't sound like I needed to do anything to it. There's no EQ, no nothing. This, to me, I haven't found any specific references to how this was recorded, but it definitely sounds like a ribbon mic to me. And then I put the stereo chamber on there, this guy. And it's just panned, hard left. So here it is with the band. Okay, so then there's some vibes floating around in the right side. So this, again, you could see this is probably crosstalk from on the tape machine. These tracks are placed in an order that's probably not consistent with where they were placed on the tracks on the tape machine. Because this sort of low-end thumping stuff really sounds like crosstalk on a tape machine to me. So I'm sort of filtering that off and adding just a little bit of presence. It sounded like it just had a little more sparkle on it in their original mix. And so this is when the vibes really start taking off here. It's playing octaves. And so you can hear this with everything. Simple part, just striking the same note. Beautiful part. Okay, so then here, goes to this B section. One of the other things I love about digging into old stuff like this, it's always just, you know, an education on musicianship. So look at the dynamics of this performance right here. That this person intuitively at the outset is playing so soft that you barely even know that the vibes are there without having to adjust faders and whatnot. It's just this cool ethereal texture that's floating around kind of subliminally. And then in this change here, steps out more, makes itself known more. Hey, there's vibes going on. And look how consistently they're playing at this new volume, right? And then in the big B section change where we change keys, big loud hit to just like, you know, set off this dynamic change when you go to this B section. So amazing, amazing playing, and that's why, you know, this stuff recorded so well, and it's why it mixes so easy. I'm not having to chase this guy around like turning his hits up and down. Look at that's just amazing, the dynamics of that. I have a set of vibes at Barefoot. They're incredibly hard to play. I've tried playing them quite a bit, and you know, it takes a lot of my engineering skills to get my bad vibes playing to work. You know, this guy's incredible. Okay, so then the strings, man. This is such a beautiful string recording. I have to say it was difficult for me to pick out exactly how these tracks were placed and combined. And I think this track may have not been used. I'm really not sure how this was done. It was too hard for me to pick out. But regardless, they sound beautiful, and I got it close. And this was another thing where nothing. No EQ, no compression, no nothing. And this stuff, I didn't even put any reverb on there. They may have had reverb on this on the original mix. But if they did, it wasn't obvious. And so there's what's labeled as high string. And this, which is definitely a different pass. And so it may have them just trying to make it sound like a larger string section. Yeah, it's definitely a different pass. And then this is emphasizing more the low stuff. So I think maybe what's happening is, now I'm listening to this again, is that this is a pass where everything is getting emphasized. All of the parts are trying to be balanced equally. And then this is a pass where they're emphasizing the high parts mostly, and maybe even just removing some of the lower register parts. They're just not being played, or they're only featuring the mics that are on the strings and leaving out cellos and violas or something. And then this is a pass where they're emphasizing more of the low stuff. Yeah, so I think ultimately what this is doing, it was tracked in a way where it gave the mix engineer control over the balance between the higher register parts and the lower register parts. So if they needed to emphasize one or the other more, they'd be able to do that in the final mix, and they wouldn't be stuck with just one balance, this overall one. And then also, you know, ends up making it sound like a larger string section, because these are all different passes, and you end up sort of multiplying the number of strings that are playing. So let's hear all of this together now. It's so beautiful. And it seemed like for some reason in the mix that the strings were leaned just a little bit one direction. I don't know if they even had variable pan knobs or how that happened. That's just how it sounded. So I put them there. Amazing string sound. To me, these sound like they were definitely recorded with ribbon mics. That does not sound like a super bright condenser mic to me. Those sound like ribbons. Just that really smooth, warm high end feels like ribbon mics to me. Couldn't find any specific information on it, but I would bet dollars to donuts those are ribbon mics. Okay, so interestingly, there's this piano track. And for the life of me, I could not hear this thing in their original mix at any point in this song at all. So I think they just muted it. It was an overdub that ultimately they decided was not necessary. So that's the piano track. So check out the original. If you go to the beginning of the song, that thing's just not in there. So I left it muted. Okay, we'll go back to my thing. All right, there we go. So then there's some cool finger snaps that come in, this nice bright percussive element that happens here. Just no EQ, sent it to the chamber a little bit. That's all it needed. And this seemed like it was panned a little bit to the left. So then all this together. It's a nice lift. It just adds a little bit of percussive high-end energy, you know, when the strings come in. Okay. So now, the lead vocal. Man, do I love listening to this human being sing. He is so good. It's just amazing. Okay, so I want to bypass everything. What is this? This was an attempt at a reverb that didn't work. Okay, we'll get rid of that. Okay, this is so amazing to be able to solo Marvin Gaye's lead vocal track. And there's some interesting stuff about this that was in this article. Check this out.
Mother, mother, there's too many of you crying. Brother, 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 there's far too many of you dying. You know we've got to find a way.
And listen to when he cuts loose, man.
To bring some loving here today.
Oh, it's so good. It's just so good. Oh, man. You know, that if I could wave a magic wand and have anything in life, I would want to sing like that. But that was not a gift I was given. So, you know, I'm grateful for what I got. I would love to be able to sing like that. Okay, so with this, it seemed brighter on the original mix. So there's a little bit of just kind of tucking in some low mids and low stuff, just getting that cloudy stuff out of there. A little bit of presence there. A little bit of de-essing. I don't even know if they had de-essers or were using de-essers, but it seems like it was that same symptom that was affecting the main drum track and the congas, that, you know, the sort of like brighter, louder stuff was just kind of leaping out too much. So a little de-essing. I put a little bit of soothe on there. Clearly they didn't have anything like that back in, you know, 1969. But I liked the way it sounded, so I put it on there. And then this same chamber, and I did it as an individual, you know, plug-in on this track, because clearly when they mixed the original, they were using a mono chamber reverb just for the vocal, to put it in its own space. And that is a trick that I've been doing for a long time. Man, I love a mono reverb on the lead vocal, it just creates this, you know, space that the lead vocal owns all by itself and sets it apart from everything else. And I always do it with my SRE, you know, chorus echo, the Roland chorus echo. Here I have an SRE 501. It's the cool one that has like balanced ins and outs on it, similar to the Space Echo, same kind of thing, but it has chorus in there as well. Rarely use the chorus, but tape delay, analog tape delay, and spring reverb all built into one box. And so I've been using that as a mono reverb on vocals ever since. I mean, you'll hear it on the first Third Eye Blind record. It's definitely on all the Smash Mouth records. I still use it today. It's on, it's the, you know, primary vocal reverb on Grace's Daylight album. That's one thing that has stuck with me over the years. I'll, you know, unless they all break. I bought a lot of them over the years because they are a little fussy, but unless they all break, I will always use that box. So, so here it is with the stuff that I put on there. Check this out.
Mother, mother, there's too many of you crying.
Okay, let's hear this with the
Brother,
music.
brother, brother, there's far too many of you dying.
Check out how that reverb just puts it in its own place, you know? He's got his own world that he's living in this track.
Here today. Father, Father.
So then there's this additional lead vocal track.
Escalate. You see, war is not the answer.
And so this one, I put basically the same treatment. I turned up the mix blend a little bit, so there's a little more reverb on this one just to have it be a little further back from the main lead vocal, because this was clearly like a secondary lead vocal. And there's a really interesting story about this. So the guy Kenneth Sands, who I mentioned earlier, one of the staff engineers from Motown, he was, you know, engineering overdubs on this song. And in the overdub process, Marvin Gaye tried 2 different lead vocal approaches on the song. He wasn't totally sure which one was going to suit the song best. And so they recorded both passes, and he wanted to live with it. And so Ken made a reference mix for him. And so back then, this was on these reel-to-reels. So he, in his description, when you read the article, he says, I made a 7.5 IPS, you know, mix of his 2 lead vocals. And what he did to save time, he put the music in mono in the middle and put 1 vocal take only in the left speaker and 1 vocal take only in the right speaker. So Marvin could very easily just pan back and forth and compare between the 2 vocal takes. And what ended up happening is he liked it when he was panning in the middle and he was hearing both vocal takes at the same time. And apparently this was the inception of what became a very, you know, stylistic trademark for Marvin Gaye, that he would sing multiple lead vocals, just like singing off of himself and harmonizing to himself and creating this sort of like, you know, chorus of himself, all reacting to his vocals and singing and bouncing off each other in this really amazing way. And it started as a total accident. There was no original intention that he was going to use both of these vocal tracks. And when he heard them, he was like, this is cool. I want to use both of these in the song. And so that's what they ended up doing. Total accident. So check this out, the way these 2 vocals work off of each other.
Father, Father, we don't need
And
to.
they definitely muted it for the whole beginning part of the song, and they had it come in here, and then it pretty much stays in for the rest of the song.
Father, Father, we don't need to escalate. You see, war is not the answer.
There's places where he's harmony,
Only love can
harmonizing, and
you know we've got to find a way
places
to bring some love in here today.
where he's totally out of sync, but he's just in a different register, just adding this other
Don't punish
sort of
me.
emphasis and energy to that particular line. It's really cool, and it's in this kind of
So you can
random way in some senses. It's just him feeling his way through two vocal tracks and letting them sort of collide and weave around each other in a cool way. It's something that I'm learning to appreciate more, to not have things be so composed all the time. Just let them happen at times and let them find their own way through the song.
right on, baby.
Okay, so now there's this cool party ambience that comes in here.
Hey, what's up now? Brother, what's up? This is a big party, man. I can dig it.
And so there's an interesting thing with this. When I pulled up this song, I was expecting to hear, I was expecting to hear that party ambience at the beginning of the song. And when I pulled up the multitrack master, you can see here, I had to basically add it here because it just didn't exist on any of the tracks. This is the original track that has all of that party ambience in the middle and the end of the song, and then it has a bunch of like gang background vocals and stuff. And it's not here in the beginning of the song. And so that was a decision that was made later on when I'm guessing they were probably mastering the song. They decided that, oh, we want to have this party ambience in the beginning. And so they probably made a mix of just this section, because this section of party ambience is identical to what's in the beginning of the song. So they took this here and put it and superimposed it over the beginning of the song and then sort of faded it out as the song begins. And I think that happened in mastering because it's definitely not on the multitrack master. And I had to recreate that by just copying it here. So now you can hear it at the beginning of the song simply because I put it there. And it's totally dry in the beginning.
Big party, man. I can dig it.
No reverb, whatever. And then
Mother,
it transitions into
there's too many.
all these group vocals singing ahs and different stuff through the song. And that sounds like Marvin's in the room with them singing along. And they're pretty loose, you know? But just beautiful in the track.
We don't need to escalate. You see, war is not the answer, for only love can conquer hate. You know we've got to find a way.
So
Bring some love in here today. Oh, picket lines.
this is a good time to check out what's being said in this song. Because we've been through all the nerdy engineering stuff, so we're going to go back to
You can see what's going on.
what's being said.
What's going on? Yeah, what's going on?
So, to me, this song, what this song is really about is communication. And it's something that just in my travels in life, it's become so clear how important that is, just in everything, because it is everything. In your close, intimate relationships, in your relationships with your friends or family, in working relationships, working in the studio, working with bands, work with groups within society, between countries. Communication is everything. It's our only path for us to figure out how to coexist without resorting to violence. It's the only tool we have, is communication. And that's what he's saying in this song. And it's what I love about this song so much. And so when you check out this section of the song,
Picket lines and picket signs. Don't punish me with brutality. Talk to me so you can see. Oh, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Yeah, what's going on? What's going on? Oh, what's going on? What's going on?
You know, that says it more beautifully than I think I could ever come up with. It's such a beautiful expression of the importance of communication. We all got to talk to each other. We all got to communicate. We all got to take care of each other. And hopefully we can move forward with compassion and acceptance. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Be safe. I'll see you next time.
You put the whoosy on the whatsy, attach the whatsy to the whoosy, connect the thingamajig to the thingamabob, and that'll make the whatchamacallit go. You hook the gidget to the gadget, adjust the gadget to the gidget, unhook the dingley-dang from the diddly-doo.